Welcome to A Focus on Family. My name is Zoe Wickham and I work for the ministry called NGM, which was founded by Ray and Nancy Gowdy. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Parsons. Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for joining me today for our Focus on Family.
Zoe.
For those of you who might not know you, can you introduce yourself and explain a little about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Rob Parsons. I'm the founder and chairman of Care for the Family. That's a charity that works with all kinds of families throughout the United Kingdom, increasingly throughout the world, actually. But, many years ago, I perceived that there were lots of charities coming to the bottom of the cliff and helping put families together when they were broken. And they were doing a great job, but I wanted also to put a fence at the top of the cliff. So we spend a lot of our time and effort on prevention as well as helping in crisis situations.
Brilliant. And tell us a little bit about the beginning of your life and how you first met with Jesus.
I was brought up in Cardiff. Dad was a postman, Mum was an office cleaner. Little terraced house. We didn't have running hot water or bathroom inside toilet or even toilet paper. Even now, I can't look at a copy of the South Wales Echo without a million memories coming flooding back. So quite an ordinary home. My parents didn't go to church, Zoe, but on the corner of my street was a little gospel hall. And in that gospel hall was a Sunday school teacher called Miss Williams. And one day, Miss Williams knocked on my door and said, "Would any kids like to come to Sunday school?" And my mother said, "He'd like to go." I was 4 years old, and Miss Williams took me by the hand and led me down the street and into the world of Sunday school. She told me that I was special to God. He loved me. She told me about Jesus. And I got interested. And then life went on. And I went to a boys' camp when I was about 11 or 12. And somebody again shared the gospel with me. And I can remember kneeling in a muddy field as a young guy, 12, 13 years old, and giving my life to Christ. So that little gospel hall changed my world, really.
Amazing. So good. And just to help people get to know you maybe a little bit more, do you have either an embarrassing story or a funny story you can share with us?
Oh, do you know what? When I was a student, I think my most embarrassing story is when I was a student, I got a job for a very big security company, one of these that deliver money in vans. I won't tell you the name of it. But my job was to sit in the back of the van and shout attack, attack, attack into a microphone if we got attacked. The only problem was I get travel sick. So I'm in the back of this van and I'm feeling increasingly sick and also bored. And in the back of the van was a massive lever, like a handbrake. And if you pulled it up, which you were meant to do in the case of an attack, which never happened, incidentally, everything stopped. The brakes jammed, the sirens went off, the petrol stopped, just the whole thing came to a stand. And we were going past Cardiff Castle about 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I was in the back, and suddenly this security van just stopped. The sirens went off. They had to get police cars either side while they transferred the money to another security van. And when we got back to the depot, the chief mechanic said, "Who was in the back?" I said, "I was." He said, "Did you pull the emergency brake up?" I said, "I only gave it a little pull. I was a bit bored and I was just wondering how far you have to pull this thing up." But that was the beginning of my work life, and it wasn't very auspicious, Zoe, was it?
That's brilliant. So good. I could just imagine that. Before we dive into today's topic, you're one of NGM's Council of Reference, and You've also spoken at Nancy's Spiritual Health Weekend in 2017. Yeah. Tell me what you love about NGM and also a bit about what you saw God do at the Spiritual Health Weekend in ladies' lives.
Yeah, well, I think there are three things which come to my mind: a deep love for God and a desire to share the faith and a vibrancy and a welcoming to young people from all walks of life, of all kinds of backgrounds, and this deep desire to help them discover their gift. You know, so often as younger people, we think we've not got much to offer, but I think NGM excels in helping young people, especially, older people as well sometimes, but young people especially, find their gift, the thing that they can really, really do. Yeah, and on the health weekend, I just observed hundreds of women feeling cared for, I think, loved, special, loved by God, but also loved by Nancy and you guys and the team. So I think people really, really felt valued. I think so often, life is busy. We go through difficult personal situations or family situations. And that weekend was a real shot in the arm, I think, for many. It was a privilege to be part of it.
Amazing. So, Rob, we're here today to talk about families and children. Tell me, how did God first call you to minister in this area?
Well, we had Katie, my daughter was about 3 years old, and my son was just born, and I was a lawyer then. I was also taking some time off to help in the leadership of a growing church, and I was really busy, Zoe. In fact, to be honest with you, I was too busy. And I remember getting home late at night, and Diane had long since given up trying to talk to me, but two small children hadn't. And they were trying to tell me about their day, but I'd be on another planet. And I can remember one day Diane waking up and she said to me, "Darling, I don't think I can cope anymore." And that was an incredible wake-up call to me. And although I was very busy and in some ways quite successful in my career, certainly more successful than I'd ever dreamt that I could possibly be when I was a child, the things that mattered most to me were slipping through my fingers. And that was a long journey. Diane became quite depressed for quite a long time. But as she began to come out of that, and we began to share with other people the lessons we'd learned and what we'd been through. In fact, we started a little group in our home called For Strugglers. It was for those who'd known emotional breakdown, those who'd known terrible trauma in their family life. Some who'd lost their faith, and all kinds of broken people tried to almost knock our door down to get into that group. And so all we had to share with them was our weakness, not clever answers, but we discovered the power of vulnerability, that often people can find their own answers, but when you share vulnerably the things you've been through and give people hope that you can come through with help. Sometimes you walk with a limp the rest of your life, but you can come through. It's liberating. And Diane and I felt increasingly called to share that with a wider audience. So one of our core values in Care for the Family is vulnerability. Vulnerability to say to somebody else, "Me too, I've been there." So those tough times, Zoe, those dark times were crucial, I think, in leading us into that kind of ministry.
Amazing. And like you said, and I know from experience, parenting can be tough. There is so much to juggle in life. What's your advice to anyone just starting out on their parenting journey?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, really. I was talking to a woman recently, and she said to me, "Do you know what, Rob? I don't know why, but I feel so guilty all the time as a parent. I feel guilty if I work full time. I feel guilty if I stay at home. I feel guilty when I pick them up. I feel guilty when I drop them off. I feel guilty if I buy them sweets. I feel guilty if I don't buy them sweets." This whole guilt. And I think we have to lay that guilt down. In Care for the Family, we try to help people in their parenting. But to be honest, there's no one way to be a perfect parent. There are 100 ways to be a great parent. And we encourage people that nobody will know your child like you and nobody loves them like you. Most of us give it our best shot. And kids are great survivors. And we always look at other people's kids and think they're more polite, they're more... And you know what's really annoying is when our kids come home, they're about 9 years old, and we say, "You've been to Mrs. Harris's for tea, haven't you? Charlie's mum, yes. And she gave me beans on toast." "You don't like beans on toast." "I like it when Charlie's mother makes it." And you go through all that stuff, all that guilt, all that comparison. And my big advice is lay those comparisons down. Let your kids be kids and enjoy your parenting as much as you can.
That's great advice. And, when you have children, the demands on your time do increase tenfold. How do you advise people to ensure they protect their important relationships, such as marriage, when they have so many demands on their time?
Well, it's not easy, is it? I mean, many people have to work long hours, be full-time jobs as well as parenting. And that's understandable. But I can tell you a mistake I made. And it was simply that when I said to the kids, "We'll do it later," I meant it. But of course, kids are suckers for the "we'll do it later" routine. Will you build this with me? We'll do it later. Will you take me fishing? We'll do it later. But the honest truth is the day comes when they stop asking. So the big trick is, I think, really, is to try to work out priorities. You know, I saw a sad thing the other day. It was of a little girl. She ran out of school and she had a painting. And she was desperate to show it to her mum. I think she's about 5 or 6 years old, but her mum was on a mobile phone. And this little girl pulled her mum's arm and pushed the painting up towards her and eventually stopped. Now, look, that may have been a really, really important phone call. But you know what? I've missed times in my kids' lives when the phone calls weren't important at all. And if that mum was just on Facebook mucking about or Instagram or something, it would be a pity to miss that moment for that, wouldn't it? You know, so some time ago, I went to watch my granddaughter play football. She's 9. She's a really good football player. Lloyd said to the coach the other day, she plays in a boys' team. And Lloyd said to the coach, how's she doing? He said, she's pretty good, but she's a bit rough. I went to watch Evie play football. She was playing with 120 kids in a tournament, all boys apart from her. And, you know, I got a bit bored after a while and they were kind of playing a game and then they were hanging around the touchline. It was a bit of a drizzly, rainy day in this big stadium. And I went to the back and I decided to ring a car hire company. And so I ring this car hire company. I could have done it the next day, the next week. You press 1, you hold, press 6 for this, press 7 for that. Eventually, even I got bored and I hung up and I went back to the stadium and Evie was running towards me. And she said, Pops, did you see it? I said, okay, Evie, what? Pops, did you see it? Did you see my goal? And I'd missed that moment, Zoe, for just hanging on a phone to a stupid car hire company on a call I could have done. So look, it's not always possible to give your kids all the time you want, but don't let's miss it for just filling our time with stuff that we could do at another time or perhaps even not do at all. That would be really tragic, wouldn't it?
It would indeed. Now, I have 2 teenagers and I know from experience, navigating the teenage years can be really tough. And for me, one of the biggest challenges for raising teenagers these days is the access to social media that they have and how that can affect them. What advice would you give parents around the area of social media?
Well, look, first of all, bringing up teenagers can be tough. I heard one psychologist describe it like this. It's as if when they're 13, they suddenly blast into outer space. They stop communicating, they grunt at you. He said, my advice to the parents of teenagers is just get them through those teenage years. Fight as few battles as you possibly can. And normally when they're about 21 or 22, they land and they come back to you. So look, the teenagers can be testing. Some kids sail through it, but you normally don't get away with it completely. But you're right, social media is a major difficulty. But look, there's lots of good in it. They're connected with their friends. They're able to get information that we weren't able to get when we were younger. But obviously, there are real dangers. And I think schools often now do an incredible job in telling those kids those dangers. But, you know, if you said to me, well, in all the dangers, what would be one piece of advice? I believe this with all my heart. Don't let your kids take a smartphone to bed at night. Don't let them do that. In fact, you know, we have a little thing we call a family media agreement where a family sit down together and they work out how they're going to handle this social media. And one of the rules we encourage people to come up with, everybody charges their phone downstairs at night, parents as well as kids. Because you know what's happening? We talk to a lot of teachers and they say, we're getting kids coming to school. They've been up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, on their phones, even set an alarm so they don't miss something. And also you open their hearts and their minds to so much. I mean, you wouldn't let a stranger into your kid's bedroom. So why do that on a smartphone? And so, well, I've said one bit of advice. Well, 2 bits of advice then. Delay giving them a smartphone as long as you possibly can. It's not always possible because all their friends have got them and you don't want to be isolated. But delay it as long as you can, and then be careful what they've got access to. But particularly that time when they're in their bedroom, I think is crucial.
That's great advice. I want to talk a little bit about family breakups because there are so many family breakups happening these days. We see it in the media, we see it in our own lives. What is your advice to anyone going through a family breakup?
Well, first of all, it's rather similar to when I spoke about parenting and the guilt. One of the first things to do, I think, is lay down that crushing guilt. Nobody wants families to break up, or very few people do, and certainly if they do break up, there are terrible pressures on everybody, not least the children. And my advice would be, number one, I think to think of the children as much as possible. I mean, most parents do, of course, they do, but often you forget how much the kids actually pick up, what they listen to, the vibes, the atmosphere. So above all, those children need to feel as secure as possible, don't they? Because both mum and dad, if there is a mum and dad, or you want those kids to feel secure. So that would be number one. Secondly, I think I would not write your relationship off too quickly. Look, it's not possible to keep every relationship together. I see enough pain in a week to last me a lifetime. Sometimes it's not even desirable to keep a relationship together. But you know what I find in our work? That often there are couples who are about to break up and they try again. Sometimes they tell me they did it for the sake of the kids. Well, it's not always the right reason, but it's not a bad reason. And sometimes in that effort, they find a relationship, even a love they thought was gone forever. So I wouldn't write up a relationship too quickly. You know, I sat with a young couple some time ago. I suppose they were mid-20s, and she was in my office with him, her husband, and she was cradling a little 6-month-old daughter. And I said to this young man, "Why are you leaving your wife and your little girl?" He said, "Well, I don't feel in love anymore. When we got married, I was so in love, but I don't feel like that." And I said, "Well, did nobody tell you that the feelings of love go up and down? And did nobody tell you that after the birth of a little one, it's really tough sometimes? The relationship is strained. You've got this demanding new guest in your home that wakes up at all hours of the night and demands to be fed. Perhaps the sex life is not so good. Did nobody tell you that sometimes you have to love, at least for a while, not just with the heart, but with the will? Otherwise, you'll never know a long-term relationship with anybody, because feelings are not enough." And he said, "No, nobody ever told me that." And so I look at this little girl nestling in her mother's arms. She's 6 months old. The first man in her life is about to walk on her forever. And nobody told him that. And I think what happens often when we go through tough times in our relationship is we think we're the only one. I don't feel in love. There's no way out of this. I've got to get out of it. And that may be the right course sometimes, but often it's not. And sometimes if we try, perhaps get some help, there's no shame in getting some help, perhaps some counseling, some efforts. People who care for the family, we try and help. Sometimes it's possible to come through. And that changes everything, not least if there are children, for those little ones.
Yeah, amazing. And I know one thing that's really important to people in these difficult situations is the support of other people. So what's your advice to friends or family supporting those who are going through a breakup?
When you go through tough times, you discover there are two kinds of friends. There are those who will give you advice. They're happy to do that. If they're extra controlling friends, they'll delight in giving you advice. And then there are friends who are really, really there for you. Often they don't say much, they just listen. They're with you. If they have a faith, they pray for you. You can read them pretty well all hours of the day, all night. And we all need at least one friend like that. We desperately need each other. If we're in a local church, I encourage people to be vulnerable with each other. Sometimes in church, people say to us on a Sunday morning, "How are you?" We say, "Oh, fine. Oh, fine." A guy called Pete Meadows used to call that the Sunday lie-in, where we just tell the fib when we're going through tough times. And I'd encourage people to be vulnerable, but don't be afraid to reach out to help. And if you're a friend, realize that most people can find their own answers eventually. What they desperately need to know is they're not alone. They're not alone. And, you know, Zoe, Dan and I have gone through tough times in our relationship. We've gone through times when we've been married for over 50 years, where it seemed that love had died, but it was all over. And I can remember one night sinking to my knees in the darkness in my home and praying and saying, Lord, this is too big for me. People come to me to help them with their difficulties and problems. I was a lawyer then to fix things, but I can't fix this. Sometimes people say to me, Rob, your faith in God is a crutch. But in some ways, I think they're right. But I was never meant to make it on my own. I was meant to lean on him. And sometimes in the darkest times of our lives, we find that.
Yeah, that's so true. Now, I noticed in a recent interview you did, you said one of the things you loved doing was the single parent holidays you run at Care for the Family. Can you tell us a little bit more about these and perhaps any stories of what God has done through them?
Do you know, so being a single parent is really, I think it's really hard, one of the toughest jobs on the face of the earth. Sometimes the media give us a hard time. Often when we go through difficulties, we've got no one to talk to, no one to share with. There's the pressure, and even if we want to go to the dentist, how do we look after the baby or the school run and all that pressure? And then again, there's the guilt. You know, we're going through a tough time with our teenager. Is it because I'm a single parent, or is this just the normal things that the teenagers go through? I think it can be really tough. So from the beginning of Care for the Family, we have tried to support single parents, get alongside them. And every year we run single parent holidays called Take a Break. We take single parents and their kids away for a week, and we spoil those single parents and we make those kids feel they're having an incredible time. And you know, I can remember one single parent saying, I just feel special. You have spoiled me. We've had this wonderful time with myself and my daughter, and also sharing with other single parents. And some of them make relationships that last a lifetime with each other. We talked about social media a little earlier. Well, that's one of the big pluses. You know, they stay in touch through social media with the people they meet on those holidays. We've just put our new holidays for this year online, and they'll be snapped up. We subsidize them heavily. Sometimes we can give bursaries to people who can't afford anything at all. But I think in all that we do in Care for the Family, those single parent holidays are what makes me most proud. And I think most of all, because we make single parents feel valued, that they're special.
Amazing. I can see your face lighting up as you talk about it. It's brilliant. You know, but at present, one of the toughest things facing families at the moment is this cost of living crisis. You know, energy bills have shot up. Inflation is rising fast. How are you advising people in this crisis? What help and support is there out for people if they're struggling? Well,
the thing about debt is it can often make us feel like a rabbit caught in the headlights of a car. And unless we've been through it, it's very hard to understand how it makes you feel. And, you know, people are going through incredible pressures at the moment, pressures of whether to eat or turn the heating on. We need each other. There are some incredible organizations out there. I mean, Christians Against Poverty. And incidentally, you can access their services, whatever you believe or don't believe. Christians Against Poverty do an incredible job. You can contact them online. You can contact them often through a church that's near you. Again, whatever you believe or don't believe. And many cities have debt counseling centers. We've got one in Cardiff we set up years ago. And there is help that you can access. And I think don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to reach out. You know, sometimes we think if I ignore debt, it'll just go away. But it won't. That's what it won't do. It won't go away. But with help, we can get through it. And bring us in Care of the Family. We can signpost you to people who can help. But I'm a big fan of Christians Against Poverty. They do an incredible job in helping people in that area.
Yeah, they really, really do. Now, family is a subject we could talk about for hours, I'm sure, but we've only got time to touch the surface today. You've already given us a couple of top tips through this interview, but do you have any other tips for raising a family of any age in these times?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, if you have more than one child, you will have chalk and cheese. That's practically a universal law. And I've spoken all over the world, and it pretty well works. Well, it does work in all cultures. Now, that's particularly golden if your first one happens to be compliant, because that's what lures you into having the second one, because you think you're such a great parent. And that testing one comes along and drives you crazy. Our first, Katie, was so compliant. The first thing she did was apologize to the midwife for being slightly late. And so for about 4 years, Dan and I think we're brilliant parents. And then Lloyd comes along. Lloyd was a testing kid and he was a testing teenager. But just a couple of things about that testing teenager. Number one, sometimes we need to take a second look. It's true that their bedroom is untidy, and it's true that they don't do their homework, and it's true that they drive us crazy, but often they've got big hearts. They're wonderful friends. They care for the disadvantaged. And sometimes you have to make an effort to catch that child doing something right. You know what? If the ear never hears praise, the heart loses the will to try. I can remember Lloyd saying to me when he was about 14, do you know, Dad, I don't think this now, but when I was little, I sometimes used to think you loved Katie more than me. I said, Lloyd, I understand that, because whenever there was trouble, you were in the middle of it. And I now realize that Katie, little sneak, used to shove some of her trouble onto you and get you caught out. But you have to catch that kid doing something right. Don't read their school reports as though they're a prophecy of their future lives. School reports measure very important things, but they don't measure everything. They don't measure the ability some kids have to make great friends or emotional intelligence. And so don't give up and choose your battles. You can't fight every battle. If you fight every battle, your testing child will say, my mum and dad are always on my back. Have as few rules as possible, but defend those with your life. But above all, realize everybody has a testing child, and Zoe, even more scary. That compliant one has a few tricks up her or his sleeve later in life, just to prove to you they're not an easy touch. So don't take them for granted either.
Great advice, Rob. Now, I know you've written some helpful books and Care for the Family produce information, hold seminars to help people on the topic of family. How can people get hold of these? And is there one book in particular you would recommend?
Well, we have written a lot of books. Catherine Hill and I, the UK Director of Care for the Family, I think have written 30 odd books between us. Well, if it's about parenting, there's a book we've written together called Everything You Need to Know about Parenting. Do you know, I don't think that is, what is the title of that? Oh, gosh, I've forgotten the title of my own book. I know what it is. It's Remember This. Parenthood, Remember This, yeah? That's a book by Catherine Hill. If you're bringing up teenagers, I've written a book that people have said to me has helped them enormously, called Teenagers, What Every Parent Has to Know. And then there are the 60-minute books that you can read in an hour. 60-Minute Father, The 60-Minute Mother. All those books are destined to give very, very practical advice. On marriage, my first book on marriage is called Loving Against the Odds. You know, every marriage goes through tough times. That's my view anyway. And I try honestly in Loving Against the Odds to acknowledge that and to show some ways through. I remember Diane and I sitting down on some long winter evenings when we're trying to really save our relationship and just trying to learn to communicate all over again. And I talk about that in Loving Against the Odds.
Amazing. Thank you, Rob, so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. To all you who are listening, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. Any links to Care for the Family and other organisations that have been referred to will be posted in the comments below so you can access them. But thank you so much, Rob.
So can I just end with this? It's a little line from our teenager seminar. We say that these words should be engraved in the ceiling of every parent's bedroom so they look at them before they go to sleep and they burn into their soul at night. If you've got teenagers, say these words to yourself 50 times a day. You ready? Here we go. Don't take all the credit. Don't take all the blame. Lovely to talk to you, Zoe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rob.